Thank you, Sri Srinivas Rao, and thank you all for coming here. So I'm going to speak on Mahatma Gandhi as a communicator. It is, as you know, the 150th birth anniversary year of Gandhi, and I have published some months ago the second last volume of a biography of Gandhi. So I thought it would be appropriate in the Sahitya Academy to speak on Gandhi as a communicator. Now, when I started my research on Gandhi many years ago, I was struck by the fact that Gandhi had 4 careers. Now, most of us find it very difficult to hold down one career, and Gandhi conducted 4 simultaneously. These were, he was a freedom fighter, he was a social reformer, he was a religious pluralist, and he was a constructive worker. And it is own understanding of his life, he did these 4 things concurrently. There's a wonderful letter he wrote to his closest English friend, C.F. Andrews, where he says, at one point it is social reform, at one point it is Swaraj, at one point it is Khadi, and it's like a pianist with different notes, playing a symphony. So I was struck by that, and of course I quoted it in the first volume of my book. But in the years I was working on Gandhi, I realized that this chap had not 4 careers but 5. There was a 5th. He was also a writer and an editor. And his output is colossal. I think, as I shall describe a little later, his output runs into 90 volumes, which is much more substantial than probably any writer who has ever spoken in the Sahitya Academy or been distinguished or awarded by the Sahitya Academy. Now, but that was not one of his careers, his self-described careers. He had 4 callings. I'd rather call them callings than careers, or vocations, or callings is more appropriate because career has a kind of instrumental ring to it, which we should not use. So there were 4 callings, and those of freedom fighter, social reformer, religious pluralist, and constructive worker. And in the enactment of these callings, he used the medium of language. And since he used it so extensively, this became effectively a 5th career, that of a writer. Now, unlike, shall we say, Rabindra Tagore, Gandhi was not an expressive writer. He did not write poetry or fiction or plays. And it is not false modesty which makes me say that I absolutely recognize that the best non-fiction writer is grossly inferior to the best novelist, and certainly to the greatest poet. So Gandhi was not an expressive writer, yet he made major contributions to the literature of Gujarati, his mother tongue, and of English. Now, Gandhi was not even a trained political philosopher. So he was not like Tagore, whose whole life was literary expression through songs and poems and plays and novels. Yet he made major contributions to literature in 2 languages, not just one. He was not a trained theorist or political philosopher. He was not like Marx or Max Weber. And yet he made original contributions to political thought and moral philosophy as well. So, I should really amend the judgment I started out with when I began my research on many years ago on Gandhi, and say that Gandhi had 5 callings, and the 5th calling of a writer and communicator was, in this 5th calling, his contributions were as remarkable in the other 4 callings that are better known and more widely acknowledged. As I said, Gandhi was a great writer in 2 languages, and I don't speak Gujarati. I don't read and write Gujarati. So most of what I have to say will be based on his writings in English, with some help from other writers who know his contributions to Gujarati intimately. But what is striking is that this person, who was a great writer, who was acknowledged as a great communicator in 2 languages, was an utterly mediocre student. In the course of my research on Gandhi, I discovered an obscure little book called Mahatma Gandhi as a student. It's a very, it's a, it's really obscure. And to my knowledge, I was the first biographer to discover it. I may even have discovered it in the Daryaganj pavement, right? I think it was published by the Publications Division in the 60s, and it's a fascinating book. It was compiled by a man called J.M. Upadhyay, who was the headmaster of the school in which Gandhiji studied, King Alfred School, Rajkot, later renamed the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial School, and I am now told tragically, no longer a school but a museum. I think Gandhi would not have approved of that. But J.M. Upadhyay, who was principal of the school, which was still called King Alfred High School. It was renamed Mahatma Gandhi Memorial School in 1969 as part of the centenary celebrations. In the early 60s, he was a principal, and while going through some papers in a cupboard, he found the attendance record and the mark sheets of the years in which Gandhi was a student. Now, Gandhi's attendance record was very spotty. Almost half the time he did the 10th class. And his marks were even less distinguished. Now, and I'm drawing here on the indispensable but little recognized research of J.M. Upadhyay. So let's salute J.M. Upadhyay, without whom I could not have, given you this information. In his matriculation examination, Gandhi got 44.5% in English. It is slightly better in Gujarati, getting 45.5%. Now, either he was a rather ordinary student, or he had extremely stern and strict, teachers who were marking, examiners. But those were his beginnings, entirely unpropitious. You would not think, based on his school mark sheets, that Gandhi would ever become a great writer or a great anything. In fact, J.M. Upadhyay ends this lovely book. It's a small book, only 60 or 70 pages. He ends this book by saying, Mahatma Gandhi's first and greatest, Gandhi's autobiography is called My Experiments of Truth. Mahatma Gandhi's first and greatest experiment was undoubtedly on himself. Because he started as an ordinary student. So he studies first in Porbandar and for a few years, and then goes to Rajkot, and where he gets a rather low second class in his matriculation. Fortunately, he came from a family of reasonable means, a middle class or upper middle class family of those days, so he was sent to London to study. And when he goes to London, as you know, he becomes a member of the Vegetarian Society of London. He is already a vegetarian because of his upbringing, but then he embraces vegetarianism as a moral or ethical creed. And his first writings are in the Journal of the Vegetarian Society of London. So there are many writers in this room of different ages, and all of us remember the first time we were published. How many rejections we got and which newspaper first published our article, right? Now, Gandhi had the great good luck of making his debut through a series of articles, to 6 articles in the Journal of the Vegetarian Society of London, because the English vegetarians were so happy that this Indian had come and had shared their views on the taking of life. So his first articles were in the Vegetarian Society of London, which gave him an audience and the first elements of learning his craft as a writer. Then he returns to India in 1891 after qualifying as a law student, and as you know, he tries his hand as a lawyer in Rajkot and Mumbai and fails in both places. So he's a failed student and he's a failed lawyer, and he's saved from obscurity by an invitation from South Africa, where 2 merchants are quarreling and needed a lawyer who knew both Gujarati and English and was trained in the English law to settle their dispute. Now, in South Africa, 10 years after he reaches, he starts a journal called Indian Opinion. So he has become, unlike in Mumbai, where he's a failure at the bar, here he's a success, partly because he has a monopoly. He's the only Indian lawyer in South Africa of, There's a community of about 150,000 people, and he's the only lawyer who can deal, who can represent Indian clients. And then he becomes active as the representative of the Indian community and recognizes, like many activists, that if you want to further your social movement, your political cause, it's useful to have a journal. This was true in our country at the time. Tilak, who's older than Gandhi, was running a newspaper. Sri Rabindra was running a newspaper, and so on and so forth. Now, so he starts Indian Opinion in 1903. And he is not the official editor, but he is essentially the editor proprietor and contributes a great deal to the pages of Indian Opinion, both in English and in Gujarati. So his first training is in the Vegetarian Society. Then, of course, he has a platform of his own through Indian Opinion. Now, it's striking that Indian Opinion was printed in 4 languages. It was printed in English, Gujarati, Tamil, and Hindi, because the diasporic community of Indians in South Africa included Gujarati speakers, Tamil speakers, Hindi speakers, and he had to have an English section because that was the way to communicate to the white rulers. Now, to my knowledge, and I am open to correction, but to my knowledge, this is the first multilingual newspaper in the world. 4 scripts, 4 languages. And he, as I said, he writes quite a lot in Indian Opinion from 1903 onwards. He's writing unsigned editorials, reports, a lot of appreciations. You know, one of the interesting things about those early issues of Indian Opinion, which I've talked about in the first volume of my biography, Gandhi Before India, is Gandhi is talking about people he admires. So there'll be a short profile of Annie Besant, or of Tilak, or of Lincoln, or of, Booker Washington, who worked with African Americans. So he's cultivating his repertoire as a writer through the magazine he edits, at the same time as he's using the magazine as a vehicle for taking forward the aspirations of the diasporic community. In 1909, Gandhi goes to England to lobby on behalf of the Indian diaspora. He spends the whole summer in England. It's a very important summer politically, because shortly before he reaches, a British official is assassinated by a radical Indian student, Madanlal Dhingra, and the Indian community and the students in London are full of this, assassination, which many of them celebrate. And Gandhi is appalled because Gandhi has already, chosen the path of non-violence. And on the boat back from London to Cape Town, after his negotiations failed, he writes a book which is later published as Hind Swaraj, which uses a very interesting rhetorical device. It's a conversation between editor and reader. And the editor is Gandhi. The reader is partly modeled on his great friend Pranjivan Mehta. And the reader is advocating violence, that the only way to get the British out is to blow the hell out of them. And this guy, the editor, who is Gandhi, is answering. So it's written because he was struck by how wildly enthusiastic the Indian students were about the path of armed struggle. So the book talks about that. It also talks about Hindu-Muslim harmony. It talks about the destruction of Indian industries and craft traditions by imperial rule. So it's written in a great rush, using this rhetorical device of a conversation with the editor and reader, and it's written on the boat in Gujarati. And he says that I was so tired that after some time I started writing, but my thoughts were coming, so I wrote it with my left hand. He finished the book with his left hand. Now that was published in 1910. I have a long chapter on the book in Gandhi Before India, the first volume of biography. And of course, it's a very important book. It's the first book he wrote. But in my view, it's also a deeply flawed book in terms of some of its philosophical arguments. For example, it says nothing, or incomplete book, it says nothing about caste at all. When Gandhi was in South Africa, he had no clue about the inequities of the caste system. So, but he writes this book, he edits a newspaper. And then in 1915, he returns to India to try and get involved in political developments in his homeland. And he speaks, he writes, and in 1919 he starts another magazine called Young India. His first few years in India on his return, as you know, are spent getting to know the country, traveling around, making himself known through the early satyagrahas he organizes in Champaran and Khed and Ahmedabad. And in 1919 he is ready to start a newspaper called Young India. Young India is eventually published in 3 languages separately. Indian Opinion had all 4 languages in one weekly newspaper. Young India appears in English, in Gujarati, and later in Hindi as well. In 1933 it is renamed Harijan. But it continues to articulate the Gandhian point of view. And from 1919 to 1948, Gandhi has a platform to put forward his views on politics, society, religion, social reform, khadi, gender rights, and so on and so forth. So, for 30 years, for 10 years in South Africa and 30 years in India, for 4 decades he is the editor of a newspaper, essentially to promote his views. It's not that he's writing for somebody else. Now, in between he also publishes 2 volumes of his autobiography, Satyagraha in South Africa and later My Experiments with Truth. So he also publishes a small book called Guide to Health. So he's really honing and developing and perfecting his craft as a writer. Now, at the same time he's traveling around, and he wrote a lot while he was traveling. Just as Hind Swaraj was written on the ship from London to Cape Town, a lot of his editorials and reports in Young India and Harijan were written on the train. Over dictated to his great secretary, Mahadev Desai. And all his writings, his speeches, his letters were collected in the great project known as the Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi, which ran to 90 volumes in its first iteration. Then 7 supplementary volumes were added of material found later, that made 97. Then there was a volume which was called Index of Subjects to the 97 volumes. Another volume equally important called Index of Persons, which remained 99. And then an utterly redundant 100th volume was added, perhaps out of patriotic pride because Indians invented the 0. And a century means something in our favorite game, cricket. So utterly redundant 100th volume was added called Book of Prefaces to the first 97 volumes. Alright, now, so the 100th volume we need not read, but here is 99 volumes, 97 plus 2. Writings of Gandhi, writings, speeches, letters, dictations. And this is an extraordinary work of editorial scholarship done by many great Indians, and 2 in particular. The chief editor, Professor K. Swaminathan, who was a professor of literature in Madras, or Presidency College Madras, or Chennai as it is now known, and C.N. Patel, who was a professor of literature in Ahmedabad. Swaminathan was the chief editor, C.N. Patel was the deputy editor, and also the editor of the Gujarati section. The volumes also came out in Hindi, and the Hindi volumes were edited by a very distinguished Hindi poet called Bhavan Mishra, a very distinguished Hindi writer, whose son Anupam Mishra was an extraordinary environmental writer. So this is a very amazing project of editorial scholarship. It's a project that should be more widely known, because this kind of project, I think, would be inconceivable in India today, and probably in many other countries too. The greatest Indian since the Buddha, to get all his works together, to translate, collate, edit, meticulously annotate, footnote, introduce with a detailed chronology at the end of each volume, and do it over 97 volumes. I mean, fortunately, Professor Swaminathan lived a long life. He had already retired as professor of Chennai of English literature when he came here in 1959, and he lived in the 1990s. So he oversaw with C.N. Patel and his other team of editors, Bhavani Prasad Mishra, Lalita Zakaraya, Lasu Ringarajan, a really outstanding team of editors. They put together these 99 volumes. Now, at that, they are indispensable to Gandhi scholarship. Without these 99 volumes, I could not have written my 2-volume biography, and the thousands of books published by Indian and foreign scholars on Gandhi could not have been written either. They are now also available online. There are several sites. You can get a pen drive and get it. But I proudly own all 99 or 100. The 100 I haven't opened yet, but the 99 printed volumes are on my shelf, and they are heavily marked as they would have to be. Now, I'm going to quote to you what the two editors said about Gandhi's writing style, and then I'll come to what Gandhi said himself. I'll give you some illustrations of Gandhi as a writer, and I'll have to read out some fairly lengthy quotations because we're talking about communication. And I'll first begin with what these two great editors of Gandhi's writings, C.N. Patel and K. Swaminathan, said about the writer with whom they spent their whole life, and what were his attributes as a literary stylist and communicator. So first, C.N. Patel. This is C.N. Patel writing about Gandhi as a communicator in his little book, Mahatma Gandhi in his Gujarati writings. I quote, "Gandhi's writings, whether in English or Gujarati or Hindi, was done as part of his public service. He never wrote anything for the pleasure of writing or self-expression." So unlike many of the other writers we know, including those honored in the Sahitya Academy, he never wrote anything for the pleasure of self-expression. He never wrote anything that you would count as pure literature. But though it always had a practical aim and purpose, most of Gandhiji's writings had the quality of pure literature. There was a natural movement of thought, not arranged by the logical intellect, but guided by spontaneous feeling, and progressing from the right beginning to the true end, according to an inner logic. That's the first quotation of C.N. Patel, that though Gandhi's writings were done with a practical aim, yet they count as literature. The second quotation is very interesting because it draws a distinction between Gandhi's English writings and his Gujarati writings. So here is C.N. Patel again, I quote, "His English writings and speeches often reflected the stresses of the political conflict with the British government." His English writings and speeches often reflected the political stresses of his conflict with the British government, but in his Gujarati writings, Gandhiji, as it were, speaks to the reader with a relaxed intimacy, reflecting the inner serenity which was the essence of his Karma Yoga. So there's an intimacy, an immediacy, a kind of informality to his Gujarati writings, which is not, whereas his English writings are somewhat more detached and analytical. Now I'm going to quote to you K.